Hello and welcome to another short little audio lecture revision activity on text 1.2 from the Edexcel English Language and Literature Anthology, and it's the Ian Birrell article, As Gay People Celebrate, the treatment of the disabled just gets worse, and it's an interesting one to look at. It's in the article section. It's an article from the newspaper by Ian Birrell, the former deputy editor of the independent newspaper. He is a columnist, foreign correspondent, campaigner and co-founder of Africa Express, as it says there. And when we get into text itself, we can have a look. So it's actually laid out fairly awkwardly for me, actually, so I'll have to zoom in and out a little bit, quite a few times by the looks of it. But the columns, in some ways, it's not like the world's most exciting point as such, but it's part of the genre feature to be written like this. But quite interestingly with this one, the way that it's written is that there is a very clear divide between that first half and that second half, in that it actually shifts, the article actually shifts in what it's actually talking about, what it's discussing. In terms of voice, think about here, it's from the newspaper. It's kind of left-leaning newspaper, so the article is really preaching to the converted, effectively. Really, it's not. It's not necessarily being persuasive. It's got the appearance of trying to be persuasive, and in many ways it is. But really, the people who are going to be reading it, probably agree anyway. So it has that appearance of being persuasive, and to all intents and purposes, it is. But it's not really designed to persuade people who think differently. It kind of is, but they're just not likely to read it. It could be. It's not impossible, but that's basically where it's coming from there. So the tone it's kind of middle class. It's kind of well educated. It's kind of progressive in thinking about different rights and things like that. So that's the angle that we're going for with this one. And the title itself is a deliberate juxtaposition of these two things. So as gay rights improve, treatment of the disabled gets worse, and I think that's reflected in this actual structure where both of these different halves actually deal with these two elements of his discussion there as well. So we have the byline here with the rhetorical question. There's a little subheading. It's not the byline, that would be where the name was, sorry. The little rhetorical question here as a subtitle: with more spending cuts looming, are we content to leave one minority locked out of society as second-class citizens? So that is a metaphor there as well, which may not actually have been written by Birrell. It may have been a sub-editor writing that. So we open this piece with: they were clearing up the confetti, nursing hangovers and disappearing on honeymoons yesterday after the first batch of gay marriages in Britain. Well, we have a lexical set here of weddings, confetti, hangovers, honeymoons, all of those things all associated with that. Notice that we got a three-part list as well, and he's drawing on the reader's knowledge of things that typically go with weddings, and that's how he's setting up this article. It was a remarkable moment as the contented couples celebrated their unions with the traditional kiss. So again, kiss, that's all linked to lexical set of weddings there as well. Within my lifetime, homosexuality has first been legalised, then embraced into everyday normality. So there's a sense of incrementum here, but there's also a metaphor there as well, with the embrace there too. Then, sorry, I'm going to move that up. Then the ceremonies mark a milestone in the bumpy march towards intolerance and equality. That's the ceremonies mark a milestone. That works as a phrasal template, and actually you could say mark a milestone is kind of idiomatic as well. The bumpy march towards intolerance and equality, that's a metaphor there as well. We should rejoice at the speed with which people who were once jailed, mocked and used as political football. So there's a sense of incrementum created there as well, and political football is metaphorical, have taken their correct place at the heart of society. Politicians of all hues, now this is familiar collocation, and it also has it's really in terms of the connotations of it. It means different political parties because each political party is associated with a particular colour, which is really basic actually when you really think about it, isn't it? We're kind of reduced down to different parties being represented by a different colour. That seems a really weird concept when you think about it, but irrelevant for what I'm saying here. But anyway, it does link to this because it's the idea of we associate different colours with different political parties and different political beliefs, and they're unified in the idea of gay marriage here in this case, or at least mostly anyway. Politicians of all hues deserve praise for displaying courage in confronting the misanthropes. This is kind of like educated kind of lexis, Latin kind of lexis here. This really just means miserable, people-hating kind of people who sought to stop lesbian and gay people from enjoying rights that the rest of us take for granted, or the rest take for granted is what he's actually written there as well. Rest take for granted, that's familiar collocation as well. Discourse marker, he's actually saying, well, it's not all smooth sailing. Problems remain with homophobic bullying in schools and bigotry abroad, but the reform shows how quickly attitudes can change. So frontal conjunction there makes it slightly more conversational. So he's really like setting up his argument here, which is, as the title suggests, as the rights are improving for gay people, the treatment of the disabled is getting worse. Then we've seen a similar rapid shift in attitudes on gender and race. For all the hurdles that still exist for both women and ethnic minorities, yet amid all the discussion of diversity and self-congratulatory talk of tolerance, one minority remains stuck in the shadows of society. That's metaphorical. It's a metaphor. Indeed, many members would argue that their life is getting worse with hostility growing. These are people with disabilities, a group growing fast in our ageing society. So the use of ellipsis here sets up this second half of the article, as we said, where he's now outlining how it's getting worse. So not only are people with disabilities far less likely to be in work, despite being the most loyal employees. So there's actually a sense of antithesis there, isn't it? Less likely to be in work despite being most loyal. There's almost it's more paradoxical, really, actually, when you think about it, isn't it? But almost 2/3 of those who develop a disability have lost their job within 2 years. So we could also use juxtaposition there for this bit as well. So there's, despite these things are happening. Reported hate crime is rising. That's passive voice there. The emphasis is on the hate crime rather than those who are reporting it. With stories of awful abuse commonplace. You can multiply all these damning statistics. This ellipsis here and the parenthesis, this makes it have a conversational kind of effect. The second person addressed there, but he's not really directing you directly, if you see what I mean. But it makes you feel like you're included in this article, that you're being directly addressed, even though you aren't really being directly addressed. Damning statistics, that's familiar collocation as well. Terrible stories of routine harassment for people with learning difficulties. Just imagine the rightful outcry if this was happening to people because of their gender, sexuality or skin colour there. So there's a synthetic list there of protected characteristics is the phrase, isn't it? So why is this happening in the wake of the Paralympics? This is an exaphoric reference, and it's again in terms of the context. The articles come out in light of the Paralympics back in 2012? Yeah, so back in those days. With all that optimistic talk of transforming attitudes. So what he's doing here is a thing called hypophora, where he's answering his own question. This is a rhetorical technique. He answers his own question. One reason is the lack of social and workplace interaction. So it's a crucial motor in changing attitudes. That's metaphorical, crucial motor. Metaphorical, something that's moving things along. So instead of invitations to drinks after work and weekend dinner parties, these are very kind of middle class, really cultural reference here. Invitation to drinks after work, weekend dinner parties. This is another cultural reference as well. Befuddled British embarrassment and befuddled. It's quite an interesting little lexical choice there as well as a pre-modifier. It conveys a kind of bumbling awkwardness, doesn't it? There is befuddled British embarrassment at best, coldness at worst. Sorry. So there's antithesis. Got a bit of a cold, I'm afraid. Towards people with disabilities. As a consequence comes a failure to understand their hopes, fears and desires. These are all, it's a three-part list there, and they're all emotive lexical items as well. So emotive lex it's using there as well. Then there is the lack of political power. One more legacy of the poverty and woeful support endured by many disabled people. You could explore the connotations of the verb choice there of endured, because it's the connotations are of difficulty and having to put up with something in difficult circumstances. Digital technology has helped, but the idea of seeking a seat in Parliament is a joke for people who struggle to obtain a seat on the bus. This is quite nice because this is an example of antanaclasis, which is when you exploit the double meaning of a word. So in this case, what's happening here is digital technology has helped, but the idea of seeking a seat in Parliament. Now, a seat in Parliament means as an MP, of course, is a joke for people who struggle to obtain a seat on the bus. So there's an idea of a seat and a seat. There's two different concepts of that word. So seat means one thing, seat in Parliament, seat on the bus. They're two different things, but it's the same word. So when you're using, normally within the same sentence, and you're exploiting that double meaning, and I always use the example of time flies like an arrow, fruit flies like a banana. So stop and think about that if you've not heard that before. But that's antanaclasis, and that's an example of it here as well, which is nice and useful. And again, as it's an unfamiliar word, you spell it Antanaclasis. So you can pause and rewind that if you want to go back and again. But anyway, you've got at the last general election, more than 2/3 of polling stations had significant barriers to accessibility. So there's more use of ellipsis here as well. It is great to see Britain become more tolerant. So this is really his conclusion, isn't it? That discourse marker is pointing that this is now the conclusion. But, again, frontal conjunction, with more spending cuts looming, are we content to leave one minority locked out of society as second-class citizens? Rhetorical question there, because of course not. Just as with gay and lesbian people, disabled people want only the same rights as everyone else. And remember that only 1 in 6 people with disabilities was born with them. One day this minority might include you, whatever your colour, gender or sexuality. So cohesion is created, goes back to the start of the article itself. It all links together. It creates a cohesive whole, and I think that's mostly it for that one. So hopefully you found that useful, and wrong thing. Hope you found that useful, and there's all the others to listen to as well. And thank you very much for your time.